And Emmy, there's a delay. There's a bit of a delay when
No worries. We'll work with it.
yeah, no worries.
Looks like we're good to go. I'm ready whenever you are.
All right, sounds good. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to LinkedIn Live today with us. My name is Leann Pereira. I'm the Senior Director of Organizational Psychology here at MTrain, and we're here today to talk about authenticity and finding your purpose in the workplace. Today, our expert is Emmy Negrin, who is the head of inclusion, diversity, and purpose at Discord. So, Emmy, welcome to our show and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're based. My name's Emmy. I use they, them pronouns. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and I have been in this space intersecting, working in diversity, equity, and inclusion and social impact and purpose for over 10 years in my career. And I currently work at a company called Discord, which is a social platform all about creating belonging for communities. But before Discord, I was at Adidas, Yahoo, Open Table. I've been a consultant. And fun fact, I used to be an international wilderness tour guide. And so I've had a really non-traditional path in my career. I'm really proud of that. And just here to share some wisdom, but also learn from you. So if you've got any questions, I want to keep it interactive and relevant for you. Shout out to Odessa. Thank you for inviting me. And super happy to be here.
Awesome. So, everybody, as we go, please feel free to throw your questions into chat. We'll pick them up, we'll get them answered. Okay. So, as we were preparing for this, we were talking about purpose and inclusion. And usually, when we talk with inclusion and diversity practitioners, we don't really get into purpose, but it's right there in your title, Emmy. So,
Mm-hmm.
why is that so important?
Great question. Yeah, and it's funny. That was something that I actually negotiated and made sure was part of the role because I believe it's so critical. The way that I think about it is that really when you're trying to drive an equitable, diverse, and inclusive organization with the ultimate goal of creating belonging, it's really you're focusing internally around how you're creating programs, processes, systems, approaches to bring to create the workplace that you're really wanting to foster, but that also has a direct impact on, you have to think about the societal norms and the different things that are going on in the world. And so really adding purpose or social impact make sure that it's a holistic approach, so it's not just internally focused, but also how are you addressing some of the bigger issues in society that are actually perpetuating systemic oppression or racism, or why certain communities don't have access to opportunity. And so that's why I make sure that that's always part of the strategy.
So much to unpack there. So we're all about social dynamics and we call it social capital in general. We have a white paper on the website if you'd like to learn a little bit more. But basically, we're saying what you're saying, that we believe practitioners generally get operational and maybe too operational and siloed and forget about what we're really doing, that it's about these relationships and these impacts in society. And I think that it's a rare treat, or perhaps it's the beginning of a new conversation when we're talking to practitioners like you who make it a point not only to talk about purpose, but then you mentioned social impact. So let's talk about that a little bit more because it's complicated, right? You're talking
Yeah.
at one level internal processes, on another level you're talking about social impact. So what is social impact and how do you connect that to your work?
Sure, great question. I think a lot of people define it in different ways, but for me, it's really around thinking about what can your organization uniquely solve in the world and creating partnerships and programs that unlock that. So that can take the lens of things like nonprofit partnerships, a philanthropy approach, volunteering, employee giving, or actually creating a foundation of some sort that actually is a governing body that has a grant making capacity, and really thinking about the long-term impact that your organization makes in the world. And I like how you phrase that, Leann, around thinking about, you know, you don't always hear that. I like to think we're forward thinking, and purpose has just been the drumbeat and something that I think about all the time personally. But also, if you think about what is happening from what kind of talent are looking for when they're joining an organization, especially in the times that we're living in right now, it's so much beyond like how much am I getting paid and the perks and the benefits I'm getting. It's what is this company actually doing in the world? What are we actually solving? And I believe that if you really ladder that up and you think about it in a win-win way, where you're thinking about partnerships that make sense for your organization, building them holistically, and also engaging your team to feel part of that solution. You're actually driving employee engagement. You're driving kind of a sense of keeping employees, retention, thinking about new ways your product can serve different types of customers or consumers or communities. And then I think the biggest thing is your brand. Actually, there's a component of, oh, we actually are like solving something bigger than ourselves, beyond just the bottom line. And there's so much research now that companies that have a sense of purpose or are good and being a force for good in the world are actually more profitable. So there's this new wave, and it's really exciting, especially when companies early on, like I'm lucky to look for, it's a late stage startup that we're building this from the beginning, which is, I think, a rare opportunity.
You know, okay, so I'm imagining a person on a blank slate, and you have a person and you have a company. And the question that everyone is starting with, and that you're asking people to start with, is why are we even doing this? What is the purpose? And how do we connect
Mm-hmm.
that to the world at large? And you said something interesting, saying that, you know, the talent these days really start with that question in mind, right? They're not, there's this whole big quit thing going on where everyone's like
Mm-hmm.
leaving. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday. I can't help but think, or at least I've heard, that a lot of that is not only the circumstance of COVID and
Mm-hmm.
all of those things, but they're really questioning the way work has been done and why it's been done, and purpose. Do you agree that that may be driving some of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we can't deny that we've all just lived. We're not lived. I'm not shouldn't even talk about a past tense. We are living through one of the most transformational times, in that, you know, our way of interacting in the world has significantly shifted. Our sense of health and access to opportunity is really changing, limiting how we feel and sense of safety with other people. And then also there has been an ongoing and a resurgence of our social justice, a sense of social justice in this country and across the world. So I think it's a radical time, and I think companies that don't take a moment to, or haven't and are still continuing not to pause to say, what are we really here to do and what are we solving for? And that can look like your company vision or mission, but then really doubling down to say, like, what can we uniquely solve in the world? And yes, there's, you know, great products that have great purposes, but if you're not thinking about the societal, the environmental, the social side of what your business offers, I think a lot of times talent, or especially people that are really hungry to feel like they're making a difference, you know, in your role, there's a moment when you're feeling pressure from so many other things. If you're a caretaker, if you're, you know, have kids, if you are struggling with your health, you know, unstable housing, you name it. There's kind of a reckoning of, how am I spending my time, and is this actually serving me? I think it's kind of like a big awakening that we're all going through, and the progressive companies that are kind of mission driven hopefully are capturing that to say, we need to rethink how we're supporting our teams, and that can look like more flexible working ways. And so maybe that means you don't need to be in an office. I know we were just talking about that. Really grateful to work for a company that's really embracing virtual work, but also creating programs that say, hey, you know, as part of your job, not only do we need you to do this for our business, but what can you uniquely do? And how do we unlock that for communities that you're passionate about, that actually we're passionate about as an organization? So I think that that is becoming not only the norm, hopefully we'll see more and more of this of companies leaning into that, but also demand. We're already seeing it from talent asking those questions when we're in the recruiting process, saying, tell me more about your commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. Tell me more about volunteer time off and programs and perks that you have, because that's a differentiator. That's really important to me, and that's helping me make the decision of where to join and where not to.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that there's a new ethic out there. We really have to understand, as a society, how to make sense of what we're doing given all of these new challenges. And purpose is the currency these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what people are looking for and what they want, and that a company has to take that into account and consideration in program development. Um, Now, how does a practitioner actually get just how does a practitioner start that conversation? Is it, do you go to the
Mm-hmm.
executives first, or do you go, and do you do ERGs? Like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you start traction on this?
Yeah, great question. So I'll put on my consulting hat for a second because I do this with a lot of organizations. It really depends on kind of what your culture is in your company. Some companies, it's a really top-down kind of business, and you will be able to kind of determine what would drive the right traction. What I've seen work really well is finding kind of a couple of internal champions and ambassadors of that. If you have employee resource groups, that's a great place to start. But if you have some kind of senior leaders that are passionate about certain causes, really working with them to say, hey, I think there's a missed opportunity here. And I think I'm hearing, staff wanting this. I think that we should be investing in this more. How do we start to think about programs like this that are aligned to different strategies that we have? And so the way that I've approached it is really a top down and bottoms up. So you're really engaging the whole organization. So working closely with our executive team to say, hey, we have a really strong mission that people join us for, but how does an average employee feel that? Right. So if you're in customer experience, do they feel connected to it? They might in certain ways. If you're a developer, there's some components, you're building tools around it. But I would argue and really kind of unpack, there's more we can do, and I think that that's going to give us a greater sense to what our mission can really be. So what I've done in many organizations is you start with, yes, you're kind of getting that buy-in with the executive team, and then you're working with existing employee groups like employee resource groups, if you have them, to say what causes are important to you, and they kind of become an engine behind the programming, and your internal ambassadors, which you can kind of replicate if you're a big company globally, to scale it, to say, all right, let's start. And you can start simply with like, okay, maybe there's an upcoming, we call them key moments. And I'm really mindful that sometimes it feels performative when you just do one thing for like Pride Month and one thing for Black History Month. So the vision is you start, but there should be ongoing engagement, so it doesn't feel like a one and done approach. Um, so that's an easy way to start, to say, okay, there's an upcoming day. What if we rallied around that and thought
Mm.
about educational opportunities where staff could understand it deeper? Maybe we're bringing in guest speakers. Maybe there's a nonprofit organization that we should think about creating a partnership with, where we can do fundraising and virtual or in-person volunteering if folks are comfortable with that. And then how do we think about what the ripple effect is, right? And so that you kind of start to build strong and build a program around it. And it takes time, but I think the powerful thing is sometimes you can feel like you're doing it alone, and especially if you're a team of one. And the more that you can galvanize people around you and share best practices and kind of get great ideas, the more that you can build momentum for your organization. So it's some of the most powerful things. And what I've heard in my time at a variety of different companies, that's usually the takeaway that people have is, I really like my job, maybe I really like my team, but wow, like I got to be involved with this project that really impacted me and I know made a difference, and that stuck with me. So that's kind of the magic that you hope for as you're building these initiatives.
Okay, that sounds like a lot of coordination, a lot of communication, a lot of training. And you mentioned being maybe you're a small team, you're just one person, and you have really to influence a lot of these other functions.
Hmm.
Is that how you think? I think that's how most diversity and inclusion folks at least smaller to mid-sized companies experience their role.
Yeah. It can be, and if you're out there and you're a sole practitioner, I see you. I've been there. It's so hard. You're not alone, and I would encourage you to build community with other practitioners. I'm part of a variety of different kind of like networking groups where we're sharing best practices all the time. So it's not as it's because it's hard work. So I think kind of the question underneath your question, I'm imagining is that's a lot. How do you start even more granular? And to me, like you can't do this alone. And if you think you can, I think that's the first thing. You'll be humbled. And I actually walked it, just to be totally authentic and vulnerable. I've learned that the hard way in organizations, especially ones with really challenging cultures where there was, a reckoning internally around, hey, our company's got some systemic challenges that, and what is our team doing about it? And I felt kind of thrown into like you need to solve it, which was so it's not solvable. Like our world and our country has deep systemic racist and broken systems that we all need to lean in. So I think that the reason why I talk about bringing people together is because it's not just one person's job when you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, or purpose. It's really about organizational ownership and transformation. So it starts with finding those ambassadors. And one simple thing you can do is host a lunch and learn and say, hey, here's some things I'm thinking about, start to galvanize people and talk about, okay, if we could create one initiative or maybe one a quarter, what would that look like? And what would the different levers be? So maybe there'd be a volunteering component, an educational component. Start small, build over time, and kind of think about how that ripple effect. So it sounds maybe a little overwhelming, but what I've found is like the more that you can bring people together over these topics, and especially gather diverse people of different backgrounds and perspectives, it's just then you're practicing what you're preaching, right? So you're walking the walk or walking the talk.
Yeah, that sounds a lot more manageable and digestible for somebody who may be an individual contributor. Maybe they have one person on their team. The idea of creating first some, brown bags or lunches where you get together and you start to understand and discover what people's purposes are. And I think that was what we talked about yesterday. That the authenticity element came in when you were able to understand the motivations behind why people would want to be invested in something like this. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's not just an org level initiative, right? It becomes something that has a lot of impact on employee engagement, their motivation, their
Yep.
productivity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. What comes to mind is when I think about, I think it's kind of like the untapped sides of ourselves that we oftentimes don't bring into the workplace that are often like unfed is how I think about it. So for me, identify as queer and non-binary, and I've done a lot of work with youth from marginalized backgrounds, really passionate about the environment. And it took me a long time in my career to actually get into a space where I felt like I could like talk about those things openly in workplace, or even that there was a career that even remotely touched those topics, right? In the past, it was like really distant. I would just do that on the side. And so I think from a motivation standpoint and on the individual level, people are hungry to talk about themselves. That's kind of just a human kind of egoic thing. If you're creating a way that you're openly talking about what causes do you care about, or outside of work, like how do you like to spend your time? Are there certain organizations that you've been supporting for a long time or you'd like to get involved with? Um, you start to see like a spark turn on for people, like wow, like no one's ever asked me that in the workplace, or I had no idea that was even possible. So I think things starting to open up the conversation that we're all multifaceted people, and maybe how you perceive someone in their role is one dimensional. We're multidimensional people. And so that's been really interesting. Even when I've done that with, senior leaders in our company, you see them as a leader, and sometimes it's really hard to say, hey, can I lean in and actually talk about this? But it's fascinating. You learn more about their background, their families. Wow, I'm really passionate about creating access for opportunity for folks in tech because I've had it so easy. I want to change that, right? Like, amazing. And you're like, oh, great. Okay. Now I understand what motivates you. And I know you on a deeper level. Um, you also find, I think there's a balance of making sure that you're creating programs and initiatives that are also connected to things. So it's not just, um, uh, I see a question in the chat that I'm happy to answer in a second around what are we solving for and what is our purpose. Um, so yeah, so, sorry, I got a little distracted by that. But I think that it's really about making sure the initiatives don't feel one-off, but they do feel like, okay, this is part of a perk of our employee culture. Or, if we're celebrating a heritage month, this is connected and this is what our business is committed to, and this is how the individual employee can get involved.
No, I think that that's related to this question of what are we solving for and what's our purpose? And because I think
Yeah.
that's a question that comes up around accountability and ROI. What's the impact of this? And what I'm hearing you say is it's important to start with some authentic need and some authentic purpose and to engage leaders in that conversations to connect them to those things, but then to take that and build outward then perhaps in a strategic way where you
Mm-hmm.
can connect it to external groups and bring others along. Is
Yep.
that how would you respond to that question? What are we solving for? What's our purpose?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that's the foundation, right? And so if I think it's kind of a pressure test of if your organization can't, I would imagine if you ask that question, many organizations, most people would have different answers, and it's actually really good to make sure, especially if you're smaller, that you're all kind of trying to align in a similar direction. So yeah, I think that's one of the foundational questions I always ask our teams. So what are we really solving for? And and I would even add, what's our greater purpose as an organization of what are we here to do? If you're lucky, you work for an organization that's already thinking about these things, and there's some language around that you can pull from, and you kind of tying it back to company values. But if it's kind of more, in the newer stages, I think starting to ask that and starting to build organizational capacity to say, like, we need to be thinking for this, because when customers come to us, that's part of our brand identity. They're going to be asking similar things, and if they're not, future generation is going to be pounding at the door. Talent are going to be asking that question, and our employees, that's going to be the reason why they stay, or one of the reasons why they stay or they go.
You
But happy
know,
to go deeper.
no, I think that that's great. I mean, I think that question is sort of like the discovery process, right? And I always think back, remember a long time ago that Coca-Cola commercial where they started to sing, I'd like to give the world a Coke, right?
Yes. Yep.
And that had no, I mean, that song had nothing to do with drinking soda, but yet through marketing or whatever, they were able to create a purpose of connection and, you drink
Mm-hmm.
soda with friends. And I think, although that was a marketing jingle back then, I think that type of element where even if you're dealing with consumer packaged goods, the question still remains, right? What is our purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And I really like, in mission driven companies like ours, it's we have a purpose to find and connect and create diversion inclusion, diversity, ethics, trust, right? We want to build a better
Mm-hmm.
healthier workplaces, happier, and we want to create social impact. But it's harder for companies that aren't mission driven, that may be product driven. So I think that question is more poignant, or it's harder to answer in those types of environments, and
Mm-hmm.
that discovery and that engagement with executive stakeholders and with ambassadors is even more important then.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I've been lucky that some of the organizations I've worked, not all, but some have like been, there's a real clear connection point, right? So right now, Discord about creating belonging, Adidas was changing lives through sport. But companies that, I remember I worked at Yahoo for some time, a little bit harder, right? Like internet, big, lots of verticals, lots of different products. And we ended up focusing on creating access to opportunity through STEAM, so STEM plus the arts, because we were a business that really was all about creators and creation, content, so creating opportunities for different communities, and we built programs around that. So I think it's also following like what is similar to kind of your example around Coca-Cola, like what's actually the end point of when someone engages with your product, like what's the ripple effect? Are they building community? They're enjoying themselves, or maybe they're solving a challenging problem that is actually deeper rooted in society. That if you put more resources or thought about your product a little differently, you could solve too. So I would say, even if you don't have like a direct tie or it's really clear, that's sometimes like that's the fun of the process, is really unpacking what are we here to really solve for, and what can we uniquely do, and what's our greater purpose as a brand and as a collective team.
And what you said about Adidas, that's ingenious. What is it creating? What did you say about that company?
Changing lives through sport.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, so I think this type of work takes incredible dedication, persistence, and skill. And so it's not as simple as walking into a room and saying, "Hey, folks, we're going to have a conversation about your highest purpose,
No.
higher purpose. Tell me what it is." Right? It's what do you and we only have a couple of minutes left, but how do you approach it, and what type of skills do you think people need to really be able to do this work effectively?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention is just like three strategic pillars that I've done at many organizations that really help when you kind of explain it, because it sometimes this work can feel like you're there to solve everything and then you're not solving anything. So I try to really put it in really strategic approach, so that when you're working with stakeholders, they understand how to work with you, and also that you're galvanizing and making it a mission throughout your organization and bringing people along. So those three are workforce. So that's really working with the kind of who are you attracting, the talent. A lot of times that looks at like recruiting and recruiting programs. Workplace, around culture. So what kind of culture are you creating, an employee experience? A lot of times that's where employee resource groups and different activities internally ladder up. And then marketplace. So that's where kind of external facing programs, partnerships with nonprofits fit in, and bringing those all together so that everything that you do should hit one or multiple of those pillars, and that you have stakeholders in different parts of the organization that you're kind of co-owning what that looks like. And then all of a sudden, as a team of one or a few, you actually are creating a movement within your organization, and you have shared accountability and goals. So I think it really does take the biggest piece of advice I would have is like stay humble. Make sure put up one of the things I've learned the hard way, and I actually just got good messaging that I was doing this better, was boundaries. Because especially doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work in a time where it is very top of mind, finally, right? This is not new. This has been since the inception of humankind. There's been so many disparities that we need to tackle, and how our systems have been created. Um, but setting up boundaries to understand, hey, I'm not here to solve it all. I'm actually here maybe to carry the torch, and to spark and ignite a sense of change within our organization. And that's how I measure success, is how many hearts did I light up today? Or sometimes it can be how many people felt moved or had an aha moment. And then on a bigger ripple effect is what kind of societal impact are we seeing that our product solving or our workforce is laddering up to. So just kind of reorienting how you're thinking about the problem you're solving has been like a huge weight and aha moment for me.
No, I think that's really important because I've heard a lot of diversity and inclusion practitioners feel burnt out by having to do all of
A
the work,
thousand
and it
percent.
and it's and it's not it's and I love the way you put it, is you're really carrying the torch, you're igniting and you're sparking, because truly this is work that each of us has to do individually, and together we make a change. Emmy,
Exactly.
is there
Exactly.
anything else you'd like to say? We're just about at time. Are there any other questions? And is how do folks reach you if they do have questions? Should how do you like to be
Sure.
communicated? Is LinkedIn something
Yeah,
that
LinkedIn's easy, super easy. Yeah, feel free to reach out there. I'm a consultant on the side, so if you ever are interested in kind of starting these projects, super happy to be a spark for you, and or point you in the right direction. I would just say, like, I think if you feel the call of wanting to do more purpose-driven work, like, don't let that just be something that keeps you up and like, oh, I don't really know how to do that. Um, it's a calling, and I think if you're here, there's a reason for it, and just wish you the best, and if there's any way I can help you on your journey, please reach out. And thanks for inviting me for the conversation. I enjoyed it.
thank you, Emmy, so much, and we look forward to seeing your work in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks, team. Take care.
Take
Have a good day, everyone.
Emmy, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And I didn't know you were